Arguably, one of the most difficult things in life is to understand yourself. We often go through life not knowing why we keep making the same mistakes, why we seem to get ourselves into the same bad situations, or into the same awful relationships. It's no surprise then that Socrates famously said, "To know thyself is the beginning of wisdom." Understanding your personality can be a lifelong journey, but the more you get to know yourself, the more you will be able to construct a life that aligns with who you are. And most importantly, becoming more conscious of who you are will help you avoid making the same mistakes over and over again. If you're new here, my name is Roni, and on this channel, we dive deep into human nature to help us become everything we're meant to be by building authentic lives filled with meaning and connection. Let's start with why it's so important to know your personality. When you know what your strengths are, then you can play into them and choose a career where your natural abilities can help you excel in that field. When your personality aligns with what you're doing, then your day-to-day feels rewarding and almost effortless. It helps you experience that flow state that we're all chasing. Like Susan Cain writes in her book, Quiet, The Secret Power of Introverts, everyone shines given the right lighting. We need to understand our personality to position ourselves in a way that will help us shine. Now, with that said, understanding your personality also teaches you what your weaknesses or blind spots are, which is crucial for self-development. If you don't know what the common pitfalls of your personality are, then you will fall prey to them again and again, not understanding that these same crises aren't just happening to you. In a way, you're summoning them. That's the nature of blind spots. We keep making the same mistakes exactly in the places that we're least conscious of. The reason it's so important to get to know the weaknesses of your personality is to be able to consciously develop these areas. For instance, if you're overly agreeable and find yourself saying yes to things that you don't really want to do, or saying yes to so many things that you become overwhelmed, then being aware of this will help you resist your natural inclinations of people-pleasing and will help you learn to become more assertive and comfortable saying no. And ultimately, it's crucial to know your personality because it allows you to construct a life that's in harmony with who you are. When we live a life that goes against our personality, it often leads to burnout and unfulfillment. If you're introverted, for example, working in an environment where you're constantly having to interact with people all day in a busy office is going to leave you overstimulated and stressed out. If you're high in openness and need a dynamic environment, then working in a monotonous, repetitive job is going to leave you feeling unfulfilled and bored out of your mind. Yes, it's important to consciously develop the weaknesses of our personality, but if we build a life where we're constantly fighting our own personality, just the sheer amount of effort that we'll have to expend to maintain this misalignment will be too much to take. At the end of the day, when we build a life that's in harmony with who we are, our life feels effortless, exciting, and rewarding. There's all sorts of personality theories out there like Myers-Briggs and Enneagram. But the gold standard of personality models is the Big Five. The Big Five stands for the following traits: extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism, conscientiousness, and openness. These traits are essentially each a spectrum, and we all fall somewhere on each one of these. Now, there's been a big debate on whether personality is due to nature or nurture. That is, are we born with our personality, or is our personality formed by our upbringing? While our experiences in childhood do have some influence on our identity formation, ultimately, our biology is what determines our personality. We're born with an inherent temperament that's in large part a consequence of our genetics. But the more we develop our personality and work on our imbalances, the more we can increase the range a bit of where we fall on that spectrum. So for instance, someone who's rather introverted can over time practice socializing and getting comfortable in social interactions. But that kind of person is never going to be the most extroverted person in the room, and they're never going to crave constant interaction in large groups. But what they can do is widen that range of behaviors from that starting point of extreme introversion to someone who's able to handle themselves in a social setting, even if it's not their preference. So let's start with extroversion. The most basic definition of extroversion is how much you enjoy socializing with others. On the low end, we have introverts, and on the high end, extroverts. Introverts prefer to be alone and are overwhelmed by big groups, while extroverts love to socialize and can't stand being alone. An example of someone who's cranked way up on extroversion is Tony Robbins. This guy fills stadiums with thousands of people and can stand on a stage and interact with the audience for hours and days. And he loves it. He's been doing it for something like 4 decades now, and he's still not burned out by it. On the contrary, you can tell that he gets high off of it, and that when he's on stage, he's in his flow state. This is because extroverts thrive when they're in environments where they can constantly interact with others. The more extroverted you are, the more energized you are by social interaction. Interacting with others and with the world is stimulating to you in the best way. And if you're extroverted, you probably go crazy if you're by yourself all day. Extroverts can't stand being alone and will always find some excuse to be around other people. What they sometimes lack is the ability to internally reflect because they're never alone long enough to check in with themselves. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, we have introversion. A great example of an introverted movie character is Luna Lovegood from Harry Potter. In most of the scenes we see with Luna, Harry and the gang usually find her by herself, either reading quietly or off in a quiet environment like the Forbidden Forest. She's also quite gentle in her speech.
Hello, Harry Potter.
Introverts feel they're most alive when they're in a calm, low-key environment. They do their best work and their best thinking when they have quiet and solitude. Introverts need time to recharge by themselves. One of the main reasons for this is that introverts are very easily stimulated, especially when it comes to social situations. So big gatherings or having to interact with people all day will leave them feeling overstimulated and exhausted. You'll also notice that introverts are more soft-spoken and will usually listen more and talk less. When they do talk, it's usually after they've thought over what they're going to say instead of saying the first thing that pops into their head, like extroverts do. Now, if we go a level deeper, on the neurological level, extroversion is technically the sensitivity to positive emotion. Extraversion is essentially how much of a dopamine hit you get when interacting with others or with the world around you. One paper showed that extroverts had a gene that coded for higher concentrations of a specific type of dopamine receptor in the reward center of the brain. So in the brains of extroverts, we find more of these dopamine receptors called the DRD2 receptors, and this makes them higher in reward sensitivity. The more of these dopamine receptors a person has, the more that dopamine can click in with those receptors and activate the neurons in the reward center of the brain. So essentially, extroverts have a much stronger reward response when they interact with others. Another important point about the difference between extroversion and introversion is how much their brains are stimulated at baseline. So you can think of it this way. At baseline, introverts are optimally stimulated. That's why they like to be by themselves with their own thoughts. They're not bored when they're in a quiet and calm environment, just the opposite. That's when they can really focus and get into flow state. On the other hand, extroverts' brains are understimulated, and that's why they're constantly seeking to interact with others. They need that stimulation from the outside world to get them to that optimal level. That's why they prefer dynamic environments, big parties, and working somewhere where they're surrounded by other people. One of the genes that determines this is called the COMP gene, which codes for an enzyme that clears dopamine from the prefrontal cortex. Dopamine has all sorts of functions throughout the brain, and in the prefrontal cortex, it's responsible for focus, cognition, working memory, and executive functioning. Introverts have the slow enzyme, meaning that they have optimal concentrations of dopamine at baseline, and extroverts have the fast enzyme, which clears the dopamine faster. This means that at baseline, they have less dopamine, and this is one of the things that makes them chase that boost from the outside. What you might not know is that all of the big 5 traits can be split into 2, giving us 10 facets. So there are 2 features of extroversion, enthusiasm and assertiveness. Enthusiasm has to do more with the positive emotional component of extroversion. People who are high in enthusiasm are the life of the party. They're literally enthusiastic. They like the excitement of being around others, are always smiling and laughing, and usually tend to show when they're happy and having a good time. These are the people who make friends and warm up to others quickly. They're also quite open with others and aren't afraid of revealing who they are. These are the kinds of people who you would describe as bubbly, like Elle Woods from Legally Blonde. She's always smiling, laughing, and has an optimistic, positive attitude. She approaches others with ease and makes friends and allies wherever she goes.
Oh, hi. My name is Elle Woods, and for my admissions essay, I'm going to tell all of you at Harvard why I'm going to make an amazing lawyer. I feel comfortable using legal jargon in everyday life. I object.
On the other hand, we have assertiveness. This is the aspect of extroversion that makes someone a great leader. These are the people who are comfortable taking charge, putting their opinions forward, and influencing others. They have strong personalities and are usually the first to act in a situation. They're literally assertive and have a talent for captivating people. An example of someone who's super assertive but not enthusiastic in the least is Logan Roy from Succession. This man has been able to build an empire because he is a true leader and a master negotiator. He's decisive and doesn't mind taking charge of any situation. He's also quite disagreeable, but we'll get to that in a moment. The distinction here is important because someone who's high in enthusiasm isn't necessarily high in assertiveness, and vice versa. Someone who's high in enthusiasm but low in assertiveness will be the life of the party, but might not be such a great leader. On the other hand, someone who's high in assertiveness but low in enthusiasm will be able to take charge and influence others, but might not exude that same zest for life or have that bubbly nature like someone enthusiastic would. Moving on to agreeableness. This trait can best be understood as a person's tendency towards cooperation, empathy, and altruism. People who are high in agreeableness are usually very caring and nurturing and are extremely conflict avoidant. They're empathetic, which means that they're very aware of other people's needs and desires. This is Mother Teresa and Florence Nightingale, who devoted their lives to the care of others. Another classic movie example is Samwise Gamgee from Lord of the Rings.
I made a promise, Mr. Frodo. Mr. Frodo's not going anywhere without me. Don't you leave him, Samwise Gamgee, and I don't mean to.
I'm on your side, Mr. Frodo.
I know, Sam. I know.
If I take one more step, it'll be the farthest away from home I've ever been.
Mr. Frodo, I'm all right. But you're not, Mr. Frodo. I'm here to help you. I promised Gandalf that I would.
Sam is devoted to helping Frodo achieve his mission and is very comfortable being number two in their duo. He cares for Frodo and is very careful not to impose his opinions too strongly and lets Frodo lead the way. All in all, he's sweet, caring, and very loyal. Because it's so important for agreeable people to be liked, they really don't like to rock the boat and always try to maintain harmony. This makes them extremely conflict avoidant, which can often create huge problems in their relationships down the road. They're very hesitant to impose their own opinion in a social situation, often because they're afraid of seeming pushy. If you're highly agreeable, you probably know already that you find it very hard to say no to others. Agreeable people are people pleasers, which on the one hand makes them caring, but on the other hand can leave them feeling overwhelmed. And the worst part is that often agreeable people start to develop an internal resentment towards others because they feel exploited. It's also crucial to know that there is such a thing as pathological altruism or suicidal empathy. These are the people who are blinded by their compassion and are motivated to care for others so much so that they're blind to the psychopaths and narcissists who are taking advantage of them. This is the trait that often leads women to stay in abusive relationships. This is also the trait that leads people to enact socialist policies, like letting the homeless roam the streets, affirming children's gender, without any regard for the real-world negative consequences. And lastly, this is the trait that leads governments to pour billions into humanitarian aid funding without any consideration for where this money actually goes. But on the positive end, agreeableness is a crucial personality trait when it comes to taking care of the weak and vulnerable, such as children. Evolutionarily speaking, agreeableness most likely developed along with the maternal instinct, since caring for infants requires a great degree of self-sacrifice and the ability to read their emotional cues. It's no surprise then that on average, women are more agreeable than men. This doesn't mean that all women are more agreeable than all men, but it does mean that there are slightly more agreeable women than there are men, and that the most agreeable people are women, and the most disagreeable people are men. The normal distributions of men and women's agreeableness overlap to a great degree, but women are on average more agreeable. On the low agreeableness side, we have people who don't bother themselves with other people's needs and desires. The disagreeables say what they think and can be quite blunt and straightforward. At the extreme end, their lack of empathy and straightforwardness can make them seem callous. They like to compete and don't mind doing so openly. They often tend to exploit or take advantage of more agreeable people if it helps serve their goals. While being disagreeable can have its downsides, it can also be very valuable. Disagreeable people tell the truth and don't mind making difficult decisions, even if it might hurt other people's feelings. Evolutionarily speaking, this was a necessary trait for hunting and warfare. If any trait exists, it must have had an evolutionary purpose. And whether we like it or not, in every human society, we also needed people who could dissociate from their own empathy and get the tough job done. Obviously, this trait can also have its darker manifestations. An example of a disagreeable character is the Wolf of Wall Street. This guy does not mind exploiting others in order to make money. He could care less about ruining people's lives and cheating them out of their fortunes. As long as he reaches his goal, the rest doesn't matter. Now, on the one hand, he is effective at what he does, but because he's disagreeable to the extreme, he doesn't mind leaving scorched earth behind him. Another example is Michael Corleone from The Godfather. He's much more introverted than the Wolf of Wall Street, but he definitely doesn't mind making difficult decisions in the service of his business and family. He probably isn't as disagreeable as the Wolf of Wall Street because while he does make hard calls to take care of certain people, he is much more reluctant when giving these orders.
Michael, you lousy bastard. You killed my husband. You waited until Papa died so nobody could stop you, and then you killed him.
Another disagreeable son of a bitch is Severus Snape, who really doesn't mind giving Harry and Ron a hard time. He definitely doesn't have a nurturing side to him. One study that looked at the brains of agreeable people found that the areas of their brain that read others' intentions and mental states were larger than those of disagreeable people. Another genetic study found that one of the things that determines someone's level of agreeableness is an oxytocin gene called OXTR. The version of this gene that codes for more oxytocin receptors is associated with higher levels of empathy and a better ability of reading emotional cues like facial expressions and body language. On the other hand, people with the version that codes for less oxytocin receptors showed less empathy and were less accurate when rating facial expressions and emotional cues. Now, like all the other big five traits, agreeableness has two facets: compassion and politeness. These two can really help explain a lot of contradictions in people's personalities. Compassion is the facet that describes how empathetic someone is. These are the people who can easily read others' emotions, are interested in other people's problems, and are always quick to lend a helping hand. People high in compassion often feel a deep responsibility to help and care for others. Princess Diana was known for her strong sense of empathy and her need to show her love to her people. She would often visit children's hospitals, for example, motivated by an internal pull to care and nurture people with her warmth and presence. If you're extremely high in compassion, This can often make you self-sacrificing to the point where it's not healthy for you anymore. Just something to keep in mind. The other facet is politeness. Politeness doesn't exactly mean having manners or following etiquette. That has to do more with conscientiousness. Politeness is the facet that describes agreeable people's reluctance to impose their opinions on others and their fear of seeming pushy. People high in politeness are those that avoid conflict and would never dare insult anyone. Keanu Reeves, for example, is known for his small acts of kindness, like giving his seat to others. This shows that he's humble and doesn't feel like he's better than anyone else. He's mild-mannered and doesn't seem to be the kind of guy to say whatever comes to mind without regard for how it would affect others. People who are low in politeness are those that don't mind speaking the truth, even if it makes others uncomfortable. They don't mind taking advantage of others if it helps further their goals. And these are the people who love a good fight. They literally enjoy conflict. This is your typical lawyer who lives for the debate and gets off on that heated friction with others. These facets really helped me understand my own personality because I'm rather high in compassion, but I'm moderate in politeness. So I have a strong sense of empathy and I'm rather good at reading other people's emotions and needs. But if you know me already, then you know I don't mind being brutally honest and politically incorrect. But hey, that's just me. All right, on to neuroticism. This trait is pretty straightforward. Technically speaking, neuroticism means sensitivity to negative emotions. People who are high in neuroticism literally experience negative emotions more intensely and for a longer period of time. These kinds of people are more easily triggered and tend towards mood swings, anxiety disorders, and depression. They have something called the negativity bias, which means that they interpret the world and process incoming information in a more negative way. One study showed that when asked to rate the positivity and negativity of facial expressions, neurotic people tended to rate even the neutral faces as negative. Neurotic people are also better at detecting errors and are more sensitive to things that are off. This can also make them helpful when needing to plan for worst-case scenarios or finding the weak points and mistakes in a given project, for instance. Another study showed that while depressive people have a bias towards the negative, they also have something that's called depressive realism, which also makes their judgment more accurate in certain tasks. While the experience of being high in neuroticism can be quite difficult and at times painful, it does also have its upsides if we learn to use them. A character who embodies neuroticism in the most hilarious way is George Costanza from Seinfeld. He loses it over every little thing. He's always worried and imagining the worst case scenario. He raises his voice in a stressed out, high-pitched way.
You know, we're living in a society.
He gets easily overwhelmed by minor inconveniences. It doesn't take much to trigger him until he loses it.
Shut up.
Costanza always looks either stressed out, disappointed, or hopeless. He finds fault in every woman he meets and in general has a quite negative outlook on life. He's also quite sensitive to rejection. He obsesses over every mistake he makes and likes to ruminate over them with Jerry. On the other hand, Seinfeld is mostly calm, though he definitely has his moments too.
I've never seen you mad.
I get peeved.
Mad.
Miffed.
Mad.
Hurt.
I'd like to see you get really mad.
Kramer, I am so sick of you coming in here and eating all my food. Now shut that door and get the hell out of here!
People who are low in neuroticism aren't easily triggered and can remain calm and collected even in highly stressful situations. These are the people who can handle dangerous jobs, for instance, or the kinds of people who can keep a straight poker face in a high-stake negotiation. A real-life example of someone low in neuroticism would be Chris Kyle, who's played by Bradley Cooper in American Sniper. Chris Kyle was a sniper in the Iraq War and holds the record for 160 confirmed kills. Now, why do I say he's low in neuroticism? Because he's so emotionally stable to the point where he's able to withstand the intense pressure of life or death situations. The fact that he can shoot accurately while under fire shows a remarkable level of emotional stability. If he were more neurotic, he would likely get flustered and be unable to perform. But his ability to handle himself in such a precise and professional manner, even in the most dangerous of environments, is a testament to his incredibly low neuroticism. Another great example of low neuroticism is James Bond. This guy knows how to handle himself in every situation and every car chase. He knows how to play it cool with women and doesn't get flustered. He can stay calm and focused during a shootout, a fist fight, and even through a painful interrogation. Needless to say, he's pretty emotionally stable. One of the reasons that people low in neuroticism can handle themselves so well in frightening, dangerous situations is because they have very low physiological arousal. This means that even in stressful situations, their body doesn't activate the stress response as easily. This allows them to keep a cool head even when things get intense. Neuroticism is a built-in personality trait. We don't have much control over how emotionally reactive we are. Understanding our tendencies can help us manage these traits in more productive ways. On the physiological level, the emotional reactivity of neuroticism translates physiologically into a stronger stress response that's also more easily activated. This means that their body releases more cortisol more frequently. One of the systems in the body that's responsible for activating our stress response and getting us ready for action is called the HPA axis. This stands for the hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenals. Basically what happens is that the hypothalamus communicates to the pituitary gland, which activates the adrenal glands, making them release more cortisol. There's also a study that after an acute stressor, neurotic people take longer to get that serotonin release that's supposed to calm them down. The two main facets of neuroticism are volatility and withdrawal. Volatility involves externalizing negative emotions, leading to mood swings and emotional outbursts. People high in volatility are easily triggered and can react strongly to perceived slights. Their emotions take control of them in stressful situations, making them lose their composure entirely. They often get angry and irritated easily with little provocation. You don't have to do much to get them stirred up and agitated. A agreeable character who's high in volatility is Ron Weasley. In the first Harry Potter movie, he does not keep his cool when those branches start pulling him under, even though Hermione told him that the way to get them to stop is by relaxing.
You have to relax. Just relax! He's not relaxing, is he?
Apparently not.
I've got to do something.
His voice gets pretty squeaky and nervous in quite a few situations. He gets quite jealous of Harry when his name is picked from the Goblet of Fire and when he gets close to Hermione.
Fine. I get it. I saw you two the other night.
Overall, he's pretty emotionally reactive. Another classic duo is Harry and Sally from the movie When Harry Met Sally. Harry is pessimistic and gets agitated easily. Sally, on the other hand, is positive, optimistic, and not easily bothered.
Like I'm going to journalism school to become a reporter.
So you can write about things that happen to other people.
That's one way to look at it.
Suppose nothing happens to you. Suppose you live there your whole life and nothing happens, you never meet anybody, you never become anything, and finally you die, one of those New York deaths that nobody notices for 2 weeks until the smell drifts into the hallway.
Withdrawal involves internalizing negative emotions and retreating from the world. In stressful or negative situations, people high in withdrawal often retreat from the external world. This tendency could lead to depression and rumination over negative experiences. It often results in a lack of energy and a negative downward spiral. They worry about everything and are easily discouraged and embarrassed. They also overthink and obsess over moments where they embarrass themselves. They usually just feel really overwhelmed by intense events and tend to retreat into themselves to handle that overstimulation. A neurological example is neuroticism co-varied with volume of brain regions associated with threat, punishment, and negative affect. Onto the personality trait, conscientiousness. Conscientiousness is an interesting personality trait. People high in conscientiousness are organized, they're productive, they do what they say they're going to do, and they're dutiful and disciplined. These kinds of people like structure and order in their lives. What's more, conscientious people hate sitting still. They can't stand it when they're not being productive. An important thing to know is that conscientiousness is one of the strongest predictors of success, even more so than intelligence. An interesting finding showed that while people with high intelligence will learn how to do a task faster, people who are high in conscientiousness but lower intelligence might take longer to master the task, but once they do, then they'll do just as good a job as someone who's more intelligent. Hermione Granger is the embodiment of the super conscientiousness archetype. You always see her studying, and she constantly uses her free time to read and to expand her knowledge.
How could I be so stupid? I checked this out weeks ago for a bit of light reading.
In the third Harry Potter movie, she literally uses a time charm to be able to take an extra class. She's conscientious to the extreme. Besides her conscientiousness, she's also highly intelligent, making this a killer combination. This is how she's able to know more than anybody else and retain all the information she gets from her countless hours of reading. If you have someone who's high in intelligence but low in conscientiousness, then what's their intelligence worth really? Because they're not willing to put in the work that will get them where they need to go. Another character who's quite high in conscientiousness and in compassion is Major Winters from Band of Brothers. He's organized and, most importantly, dutiful. He feels a strong sense of duty towards his company and his role as their commanding officer. What's more, the combination of his high conscientiousness along with his compassion makes him extremely loyal and hardworking, especially when it comes to bearing the responsibility of his position and not using his leadership position to slack off. Every personality trait has an underlying emotion. Extroversion, for instance, is tied to sensitivity towards positive emotions. Neuroticism is tied to sensitivity towards negative emotions. Agreeableness is tied to empathy, and openness, which we'll get into, is tied to the motivational exploratory system. The two main emotions underlying conscientiousness are disgust, which we'll get to later, and guilt. People high in conscientiousness are often motivated by a strong sense of guilt whenever they're not working and whenever they don't honor their commitments. It's not so much that they're positively motivated towards a desired goal. That usually has to do more with extroversion. Highly conscientious people often feel a deep discomfort if they're not doing something productive. This guilt drives them to progress towards their goals and keep themselves busy. They find it hard to relax even when they do have free time. They'll often fill their free time with tasks like organizing, building, studying, exercising, or anything that feels worthwhile. This tendency towards productivity can also lead to perfectionism, especially if they're also high in neuroticism, because they're constantly noticing errors everywhere. Because they like order, they can drive themselves crazy with trying to make everything line up perfectly. This perfectionism can be exhausting and most of the time just ends up being counterproductive. On the other end of the spectrum, we have low conscientiousness. People low in conscientiousness have a harder time creating structure in their lives. They struggle with discipline and often dislike having a set schedule. They prefer a more dynamic, go-with-the-flow lifestyle. People low in conscientiousness don't experience the same level of guilt that conscientious people do. They have a much easier time relaxing and definitely don't experience that relentless feeling that they've got to be productive at all times. The archetypal movie character of low conscientiousness is the dude from Big Lebowski. This guy could care less. He's messy, dresses like a slob, sits around all day, and goes to play bowling with his friends all the time. To put it mildly, he doesn't have any grandiose ambitions. A key feature of people who are extremely low in conscientiousness is that they try to mooch off others and make money by doing nothing, which he tries to do by getting compensated by the wealthy Jeffrey Lebowski. Not exactly the kind of guy you want to emulate, no matter how hilarious he is. He's definitely the Peter Pan archetype of low conscientious men. An important distinction between high and low conscientiousness has to do with boundaries. People high in conscientiousness like borders and boundaries. They want things to be properly defined and in their place. In contrast, people low in conscientiousness hate strict boundaries. They prefer things to be murky or undefined, since clear definitions feel constraining to them. This difference underlies the divide between right and left political leanings. People high in conscientiousness prefer clear, properly maintained borders, both physically and culturally. Those who are more liberal tend to prefer open borders and inclusion of everyone in the group. Now let's talk about the two facets of conscientiousness: industriousness and orderliness. Industriousness has to do with the aspect of conscientiousness that makes people dutiful, accountable, productive, and active. Industrious people are focused, decisive, and get through their tasks quickly. Most importantly, industrious people finish what they start and don't like to leave loose ends. This is the aspect of conscientiousness that is most associated with that feeling of guilt. A real-life example of someone who's extremely high in industriousness, but perhaps only moderate in orderliness, is Elon Musk. This guy has built multi-billion-dollar companies and isn't planning on stopping anytime soon. To say he's hardworking is an understatement. In order to achieve these levels of success, he has to be working around the clock with little sleep. People who like to hate on Elon Musk types as if they're greedy capitalists have absolutely no idea how much these entrepreneurs actually work to get to where they are. People who like hating on entrepreneurs are usually low in conscientiousness and resentful. People who are high in facet orderliness are organized and want everything to be just right. They can't stand disorder and always make sure that their space is tidy and clean. You'll never see them just leaving their belongings lying around. This is also the facet that makes people prefer schedules and clear routines. And lastly, they want rules to be observed and for order to be properly maintained. While there's a lot of usefulness in being orderly and organized, this facet can also make someone pedantic and quite anal. If someone's too orderly, they can be pretty exhausting to live with. One character who's orderly to the extreme is Sheldon Cooper from The Big Bang Theory. He's obsessed with cleanliness. When he rides the bus, he wears special bus pants over his regular pants to avoid contamination from the bus seats. He needs everything to be just right. He has to sit in his exact spot every time, for example, and he follows an insanely strict routine.
Hello, Penny.
Hello, Sheldon.
You're in my spot. But it's still no reason to have your feet in my spot.
A very negative representation of the super orderly and pedantic archetype is Professor Umbridge from the 5th Harry Potter movie, Order of the Phoenix.
I will have order!
Not only does she want rules to be maintained, but she makes sure to add new rules every week, and she polices these rules to a suffocating degree. She's also sadistic, but that's not related to the conscientious component. Now, I also promised to talk about the emotion of disgust, which is a strong underlying factor of the orderliness facet. People who are high in orderliness don't just hate mess, they're disgusted by mess. They don't just dislike people who don't follow the rules and commit moral transgressions, but they're disgusted by them. And their need to keep everything clean is motivated by this strong sense of disgust. Now, it's important to note that there's an evolutionary basis for the emotion of disgust, and that's protection from pathogens. Disgust is the main driver of what is known as the behavioral immune system. While we have an internal immune system, we also have one that's expressed in our behaviors and avoidance of potential contaminants. People who are high in orderliness experience a stronger sense of disgust in response to messy, dirty environments, to sick people, and even to strangers. Because evolutionarily speaking, strangers from a different population could often bring with them unknown diseases. This is exactly what happened when the Europeans reached the Americas and wiped out 90% of the native population. So while people who are easily disgusted and even xenophobic might seem just plain nasty, there's really a deep evolutionary protective mechanism behind these automatic responses. Now let's talk about trait openness. You can think of openness as how much somebody enjoys novelty, which means things that are new. Simply put, openness is about how much someone prefers the new and unfamiliar over the traditional and familiar. People high in openness love change and variety, while people low in openness prefer things to stay the same and are often threatened by change. This trait is related to a desire for exploration and embracing unusual or unfamiliar ideas and experiences. Openness is also very much related to creativity because people who are high in openness are constantly generating new ideas. The thing with creativity is that not all new ideas work. Many of the ideas that creative people generate can be a bit bizarre or out there, and some can really be impractical. But whenever you're trying to innovate and push the limits of a given field, we have to some degree, test the boundaries and do things that are unconventional. They may come up with ideas that seem unusual or even impractical, but some of these ideas can lead to major breakthroughs. A classic example is the invention of the airplane. Even after the first airplane was designed, there were men who constantly worked on improving these designs, giving us transatlantic airplanes that can get us from Paris to New York in just under 8 hours. These were things that were once thought impossible. Another killer example of someone who's high in openness is Dr. Emmett Brown from Back to the Future. This guy is willing to try the craziest things, like building a time machine, even though he has no idea if it'll work. He still believes in his idea and tries it out. His hair, that crazy look on his face, is someone who doesn't care about convention and is constantly busy thinking and working on his ideas. Now, granted, this is a fictional story and we don't have a time machine yet, but you get the point. People high in openness generally love having new experiences, tasting new foods, and are extremely curious and open to different cultures and ways of life. These individuals are often unconventional. This is often visible in the way they dress or in their interests. It's definitely not what everyone else is doing. They might have very particular musical preferences that aren't exactly mainstream. People who are low in openness, on the other hand, are the kind of people who not only don't like novelty, but may even be averse to it. So what do they like? Generally, they tend to like the familiar, tradition, and they don't like to try new things. They prefer to keep things as they are, eat the same classic foods, stay within their culture, and not venture out into the unknown territories. They prefer familiarity and routine. Now, an example of someone who is low in openness would be someone like Martha Stewart. Yes, she's out there in the world with all sorts of reality TV shows and cookbooks, but at the end of the day, she's not cooking some super exotic new recipes from all sorts of cultures. She's American. She teaches people how to cook and bake very traditional American housewife type of foods. The products she sells in her cookbooks all look like they would fit in the 1950s. This woman doesn't like change, and she doesn't like to try new things. She's basically hammering on the old and the traditional, which is fine. She's keeping that American tradition alive, and has taught many women, including myself, how to cook a pumpkin pie. So there's always value in that too. There are positives and negatives to each one of these traits. People who are high in openness, while they can be super creative and innovative, can also drive themselves a little crazy with all of these ideas. Their openness to things that are new can sometimes get them into uncomfortable or dangerous situations. Because when you're so open to new things, new experiences, and new people, you might find yourself in places that you really shouldn't be. Now, people who are low in openness can, for a lack of a better word, be kind of closed-minded. They can be kind of square and really not open to anything that's a little outside of their comfort zone. While they love tradition, and there's a lot of beauty in that, they can also become very rigid and unaccepting of change that might even benefit them. A movie example of someone with low openness is Clint Eastwood's character in Gran Torino, which is a great movie, by the way. This guy has been living in the same neighborhood since God only knows when. And then he finds himself widowed, and the entire neighborhood is changing all around him. All those same American young families who lived on his block all moved out, and a completely different demographic has taken their place.
What the hell these Chinese have to move in this neighborhood for?
This guy clearly hates change and really doesn't mind showing it. He doesn't welcome it, he's suspicious of it, and doesn't mind showing how irritated he is. And we can definitely call him a little racist.
How many swamp rats can you get in one room?
Now, as we said, every personality trait has an underlying emotional system. And for openness, this would be the exploratory system. In his book, Affective Neuroscience, Jack Panksepp called this the seeking system. Openness relates to the brain's exploratory system, driven by dopamine, which creates a sense of anticipation and excitement when engaged in exploration. Panksepp puts it this way: when activated, the seeking system manifests as a unique affective state in both animals and humans, characterized by a profound sense of interest, curiosity, and anticipatory eagerness. In animals, this might look like a pattern of excited exploration, while in humans, it often fuels ambitions, goals, and the sustained pursuit of new ideas. For those high in openness, exploring new things provides a dopamine hit, fueling their curiosity and motivation. The more they explore, the more they get that dopamine hit, which feeds the exploratory system. So if people high in openness get this dopamine hit when they explore new things, why do people low in openness stay away from anything that's new and unfamiliar? Simply put, the reason for this is that exploration is mediated by two systems: the dopamine system, which drives exploration and motivates you to move forward, and the noradrenaline system, which creates an aversive reaction towards anything that's unfamiliar. Why do we need an aversive reaction to new things? Because any unknown stimulus could be either rewarding or potentially dangerous. There's a really great personality researcher named Colin DeYoung that I strongly recommend if you want to geek out on these topics a little more. In his paper, The Neuromodulator of Exploration, he explains it this way: severely anomalous events, which have highly uncertain meaning, constitute one of the most motivating but also the most conflict-generating and thus stressful classes of stimuli. They trigger massive release of neuromodulators, including both dopamine to drive exploration and noradrenaline, also called norepinephrine, to drive aversion and to constrain exploration. We're all wired differently, and people high in openness tend to value novelty more than they fear it. Roughly speaking, for people low in openness, that noradrenaline system can be stronger, which creates fear of avoidance of new things. It's more closely related to neuroticism though, but the clearest finding is that for people low in openness, the activation of the dopamine system in response to novel stimuli is much lower. So they don't really experience that exciting curiosity element of exploration. Now, let's get into the two facets that are really important to fully understand this personality trait. These facets are openness to ideas, otherwise known as intellect, and openness to experience, otherwise known as openness to aesthetics. People high in openness to new ideas love thinking abstractly, learning new things, reading literature and poetry, and engaging in intellectual discussions. Some would say that they crave these intellectual conversations. I can definitely relate. These kinds of people are very comfortable with complex, unusual ideas and enjoy philosophical or existential inquiry. They're not only comfortable with complex ideas, but they're also very quick to understand these ideas and are capable of processing a lot of new information. They enjoy solving difficult problems that push their thinking to the limits and enjoy the challenge of reading difficult material. They often have rich vocabularies, can think quickly, and know how to articulate their ideas clearly. These are your philosophers, professors, innovators, and authors, people who excel in debate and mastery of language. Openness to experience, or aesthetics, is about having a strong sensory response to beauty, art, and nature. Aesthetics here can mean a deep appreciation of beauty or new and exciting sensory experiences. Individuals high in this area often get lost in music, art, and creative pursuits. Like people with openness to ideas crave intellectual conversations, people with openness to aesthetics need a creative outlet. These are your artists, musicians, dreamers, painters, sculptors, and designers. They have intense sensory experiences and a strong aesthetic sense. Not only that, but their affinity for the new makes them want to experiment with the designs that are out there and unconventional. A great example of someone who's intensely high in openness to aesthetics is David Bowie. You can tell by his wild, colorful clothes and that androgynous look that he played with throughout his career, constantly pushing the limits of convention in every direction he could. His unique lyrics that aren't always understood are designed to evoke an intense emotional reaction. He's trying to make you feel something, and that's exactly what an aesthetic experience actually is. A subset of openness to aesthetics is sensation seeking, which is essentially seeking out thrilling, new experiences. We can often see this in people who are also moderately high in the enthusiasm facet of extroversion and low in neuroticism. These are the kinds of people who seek out stimulating new experiences like extreme sports or traveling to exotic places. They're looking for experiences that will make them feel alive. Think of Wim Hof, who climbed Kilimanjaro in shorts and who holds the record for the longest ice bath of 2 hours. This is a guy who's hungry for new experiences and wants to try things that have never been tried before.
I always will embrace the unknown, because it's just more exciting than boring.
So ultimately, understanding your personality traits helps you develop strengths and work on weaknesses to become a well-rounded individual. Exploring your personality, such as through the Understand Myself test, provides insights into where you fall on these trait spectrums. Developing character involves leveraging strengths while consciously improving weaker areas to achieve personal growth. Personality is a passion of mine, and I'm here to explore these traits deeply with you in future videos. If you're interested in diving into your own personality insights, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment and let's connect. I'm also going to start offering one-on-one sessions where we can go over your personality and dive into your strengths and how you can work on your weaknesses. So if you're interested in that, let me know and we'll start making it happen. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Till next time, guys.